Hey guys, Scarlett here. I hope you all are doing well. It has been a crazy busy week for me. I'm not sure if you've seen yet, but I recently launched my tarot deck called the Key Tarot. So thank you all so much for your amazing support on this project. I've been working on creating my own tarot deck for over a year. So I'm finally really excited to share it with you. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the website of my tarot deck, I will link that down below. So definitely check that out. And again, I really appreciate all your support. You guys have been following me on my tarot journey for quite a while. So it's so wonderful to finally be able to use my artistic energy to create something to give back to you guys. But for today's video, we are going to talk about 3 tarot decks that I would recommend for any tarot beginners out there. And I also have a sponsor for this video, so thank you so much to Tarot and Vix. They created these amazing tarot themed banners here, and they are super soft and lovely. So if you are looking for any tarot themed decor, I would definitely recommend checking them out. I will put an Amazon link in the description in case you are interested. So let's jump right in to the video today. Here are 3 tarot decks I would recommend for beginners. So the first tarot deck I would recommend is definitely the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot. I'm sure you guys could guess that I would include this deck on this list because this is the quintessential tarot deck for anyone out there who is going through the process of learning tarot. Here I have the Universal Waite edition, but there are so many different editions of the Rider-Waite deck. So I've had this personal deck for about over 10 years. I got this when I was 13 years old, so it is the oldest deck that I own. And it's gone through so many amazing journeys with me. I have a lot of personal connection to this deck, and this is the deck that I use for the majority of my client readings. So the reason the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is wonderful for any tarot beginners is that the symbolism contained in this deck is going to be symbols you find on the majority of other tarot decks. So if you learn how to read tarot on the Rider-Waite deck, you'll be able to read tarot on pretty much all other tarot decks out there. So it's really good to start here. And also, this deck has full narrative scenes for each of the minor arcana cards, which is something you don't see in all decks. A lot of other decks are in what's called pip style, which means the minor arcana cards just have repeated symbols as opposed to full narrative scenes. And it's that imagery and these scenes that really help jog your memory and ensure that you actually do remember the card meanings. So this deck I would recommend for beginners is, if you're gonna buy one tarot deck, it should be this one here. These images are classics and they really portray these sacred archetypes so wonderfully. So that's what I would choose for any beginner out there, to always start with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So the second deck that I would recommend is the Marseille Tarot. This is a classic tarot deck from around the 1500s. And I think it's really important to have a couple decks that really portray some of the tarot history. Because for me, one of the important parts of becoming a tarot reader is understanding where these archetypes started and following their transition through time. Because some of these archetypal images do change quite significantly over the centuries. Especially here, you can take the full card in the Marseille deck. It's gonna look quite a bit different from the Rider-Waite Fool. And it's important as a reader to understand why those changes occurred and what they represent in terms of how you would interpret that card's meaning. So the Marseille deck is great because the images really pop. It has those like clear primary colors. Again, there are multiple variations of the Marseille deck, but any variation you get would do a great job of really showing you what some of the earlier interpretations of these archetypes looked like. And this is a deck which is in pip style. So reading with the minor arcana is going to be quite a challenge with the Marseille deck. So as you're going through your tarot journey, you can look at both the Rider-Waite and the Marseille deck to really help get a wider understanding on the evolution of these cards and their meanings, and also how the minor arcana has changed as well over time. Now, if you wanted to go back even a bit further in time, you could technically start with the Visconti Sforza, which is the first tarot deck. It was created in the 1400s in northern Italy, and it was made for the current Duke of Milan. And this is the original deck. Tarot started as a playing card game in Italy among the nobles, and then eventually transitioned to a divinatory tool. I have a whole video that goes into the evolution of tarot, so I will link that down below in case you are curious. So while I do like a lot of the imagery in this deck, I do find that the Marseille deck does a bit of a better job in portraying those archetypes. So if you had to choose just one historic deck to go with, I would pick the Marseille deck, but the Visconti Sforza is definitely a runner-up. My last pick for tarot beginners is the Wild Unknown Tarot. This deck has risen in popularity quite a bit. You can find it just about anywhere, which is great for anyone who is new to tarot and just starting out. Now, the reason I picked the Wild Unknown deck is similar to the reason why I picked the Marseille deck, in that I think it's really beneficial to trace the evolution of the archetypes. So just as it is important to start with some of the earlier decks from the 1400s or the 1500s, I think it's likewise just as important to work with a deck that is really contemporary. And this deck clearly is. The imagery has shifted a lot. Some of those classic symbols are not going to be seen in this deck, though the card meanings themselves are still for the most part maintained, just expressed through a different variation of symbolism. So you'll see here the images are quite minimalist, and it is a bit tricky to learn tarot on this deck alone, which is why I think it makes sense to start with the Rider-Waite and then incorporate some more historic decks and some more modern and contemporary decks. And I also picked this deck because from doing readings for various clients, I found that people really connect with the imagery here. They're all animals in the deck. There's no people in this deck. So I find that people really are drawn to it in a lot of different ways. And it's been very fascinating to see how this deck has risen in popularity so much and has such wide appeal. One of the first videos I did for YouTube way back when was going over the unique symbolism of the Wild Unknown deck. So I'll link that down below too in case you'd like to take a look. But overall, I think it's just wonderful to have a couple decks that really show you this evolution of these archetypes, because that's going to give you a much deeper understanding of each of the card meanings than working with just one deck alone. Now, if the Wild Unknown deck isn't your cup of tea, I would recommend checking out the Fountain Tarot, which is another contemporary deck that's pretty easy to find. And this deck, instead of kind of illustration style, very kind of dark, a lot of black and whites, this deck goes with a more watercolor style. It's a bit softer, a bit more intuitive and ethereal. So this is another great contemporary deck that I would recommend for any beginners out there, especially if you're not really feeling the vibe of the wild unknown. So thank you guys so much for watching my video today, and also thank you to the sponsor of my video, Tarot and Vix. And of course, if you have not seen my new tarot website yet for my new deck, the Key Tarot, I will link that down below in the description, so definitely check that out. And I will see you all next week. Bye!